The lawyer's office smelled like expensive leather and broken dreams. Carmen Reyes sat in a chair that cost more than her monthly rent. Her 5-year-old son, Marco, pressed against her side, both still wearing their thrift store coats because the receptionist's disapproving glance had made it clear they weren't worth the courtesy of a coat rack. Across the polished mahogany desk sat Marcus Hartwell, senior partner at Hartwell Associates, his silver cufflinks catching the light as he shuffled papers with the practiced indifference of someone who dealt with desperate people every day. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Carmen was 29 years old, though the exhaustion carved into her features made her look closer to 40. Her hands were calloused from cleaning houses, her nails broken short from scrubbing floors on her knees. She worked 4 jobs to keep Marco fed, clothed, and in daycare while she cobbled together enough hours to survive. Morning shift at the bakery on 5th Avenue, starting at 4 a.m., afternoon cleaning offices downtown, evening babysitting for families who could afford nannies but preferred cheaper options, late-night data entry from her laptop, her eyes burning until the screen blurred into meaningless shapes. She slept 3 hours a night if she was lucky, 4 if Marco didn't have nightmares about his father, who'd left them 2 years ago with nothing but debt and a restraining order. Carmen had been too afraid to file until it was almost too late. "Miss Reyes," Marcus began, his tone suggesting this meeting was an inconvenience. "You're here regarding the estate of Peter van der Berg, who passed away 6 weeks ago in Utrecht, Netherlands." Carmen blinked, the name meaning nothing. "I don't know anyone in the Netherlands. There must be a mistake." "No mistake. Our firm was retained to locate Mr. van der Berg's next of kin." Marcus pulled out a genealogy chart that looked like it had cost a fortune to research. "Peter van der Berg was your great-grandfather's brother. Your great-grandfather, Willem Reyes, immigrated to America in 1952, changed his name from van der Berg to Reyes, and cut all ties with his family. According to our research, you are Peter's closest living relative. I never heard my family mention anyone named Peter or any relatives in Europe." Carmen's voice came out small, uncertain. Her grandmother had died when Carmen was 12, taking whatever family history she'd known to the grave. Her own mother had passed from cancer 3 years ago, leaving Carmen completely alone except for Marco. "That's not uncommon in cases of family estrangement." Marcus continued reading from his file. "Peter van der Berg lived alone on a property in the Dutch countryside. He never married, had no children, and specified in his will that his estate should pass to Willem's descendants, if any could be located." Carmen felt Marco's small hand grip hers tighter. "What kind of estate?" "A windmill, primarily. Built in 1847, it's been in the van der Berg family for over 170 years. Marcus pulled out photographs, spreading them across the desk. "I should warn you, Miss Reyes, the structure is in severe disrepair. It hasn't operated in decades. The local municipality has declared it structurally unsound. There are back taxes owed, and the land it sits on, while scenic, is of minimal value." Carmen stared at the photos. The windmill was massive, 4 stories of weathered stone and rotting wood. The sails were broken, hanging at awkward angles like broken bones. Windows were shattered, the door barely attached to its hinges. It looked less like an inheritance and more like a liability, a money pit that would swallow whatever resources she didn't have. "How much are the back taxes?" "Approximately 15,000 euros. About $16,000 US. Marcus said it casually, as if everyone had that kind of money lying around. "The municipality is willing to work out a payment plan, or you could simply disclaim the inheritance. Let the property revert to the local government." $16,000. Carmen's stomach clenched. She was 3 months behind on rent. Her car was making sounds that promised expensive repairs. Marco needed new shoes. Again, because his feet wouldn't stop growing. She had $247 in her checking account and 2 weeks until she was homeless. Is the property worth anything? Could I sell it? Marcus's expression suggested he'd been waiting for this question. We've consulted with Dutch real estate agents. Given the structure's condition and the cost of demolition, which would fall to any buyer, market value is estimated at perhaps 20 to 30,000 euros. Maybe, if you can find someone willing to take on the liability. So, even if she could sell it, after taxes and whatever other fees these lawyers would charge, she'd maybe break even, or more likely, end up further in debt. The practical choice was obvious. Walk away. Disclaim the inheritance. Let someone else deal with a broken windmill in a country she'd never visited. There is one other matter. Marcus pulled out a handwritten letter. The paper yellowed and creased. Peter left this for whoever inherited. I'm required to give it to you before you make your decision. Carmen took the letter with trembling fingers. The handwriting was spidery but careful, written by someone who'd taken time to choose each word. To whoever receives this letter, if you are reading this, you are family I never met. Willem, my brother, left in anger over choices I made, over a life he couldn't understand. We never reconciled. That is my greatest regret. I spent my life in this windmill. People called me foolish, said I was wasting my time, maintaining a relic that no one needed anymore. Perhaps they were right. The mill stopped grinding grain long before I was born. But it was home, and home matters even when the world tells you it doesn't. I know the mill is broken now. I know it looks worthless. But windmills have secrets, hidden places built by people who understood that valuable things need protection. Before you walk away, before you let them tear it down, look deeper. The foundation holds more than just stone. You are family. That means something, even if we never knew each other. Peter. Carmen read it 3 times, her heart hammering. Hidden places. The foundation. Was this real, or the delusions of a lonely old man who'd spent too many years alone? Did Peter have any money? Any other assets? She was grasping at straws, desperate for some sign that this wasn't just an expensive burden disguised as a gift. He lived on a small pension. His bank account held approximately 3,000 euros when he died, which went to cover funeral expenses. Marcus began gathering his papers, signaling the meeting was ending. I need your decision by Friday, Miss Reyes. Either file the acceptance paperwork and take responsibility for the property and its debts, or sign the disclaimer and walk away. Carmen stood, her legs unsteady. Marco clutched Mr. Patches, his stuffed rabbit, looking up at her with eyes that trusted Mama to make everything okay. Can I think about it? You have until Friday. Outside, the March wind cut through their thin coats. Carmen held Marco's hand as they walked to the bus stop, because the parking meter had already eaten her last quarters. Her phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Chen, one of her cleaning clients. Need to cancel. Tomorrow's appointment. Won't need your services anymore. Another job gone. Carmen did the math automatically, the arithmetic of survival that ran constantly in her head. Without Mrs. Chen's weekly payment, she was short $300 this month, which meant she couldn't make rent, which meant another conversation with her landlord, more promises she couldn't keep, more excuses that sounded thinner each time. The bus ride home took 40 minutes through neighborhoods that got progressively worse. Their apartment was in a complex that should have been condemned, where the elevator never worked, and the heat was optional. One bedroom that they shared, a kitchen where the faucet leaked, no matter how many times maintenance promised to fix it. If you find this story engaging, Please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. And walls so thin Carmen could hear every fight, every television, every life happening around them. That night, after Marco was asleep, Carmen sat at their tiny kitchen table with a calculator and a stack of bills that never got smaller. Rent, $950, 3 months overdue. Electric, $200, final notice. Car insurance, $175. Or lose the vehicle she needed for work. Groceries, whatever was left, which was never enough. She'd been feeding Marco first, eating his leftovers, telling herself she wasn't hungry when her stomach ached with emptiness. She pulled out Peter's letter again, reading by the light of a bare bulb, because the lamp had broken months ago. The foundation holds more than just stone. What did that mean? Was it real? Or was Peter just a sad old man trying to make his worthless property sound important? Carmen had learned the hard way that hope was expensive. Every time she'd believed things might get better, the universe had proven her wrong. When Marco's father had promised to change, when her mother had said the cancer was treatable, when her landlord had said 1 more week wouldn't matter. But what if? The question kept her awake, staring at water stains on the ceiling. What if Peter was telling the truth? What if there was something in that windmill worth finding? She thought about $16,000 in back taxes, about a structure so broken the government wanted to demolish it, about a letter from a stranger claiming family mattered, about Marco sleeping in the next room, deserving more than this life of barely surviving. What if, in the morning, Carmen called the lawyer's office before she could talk herself out of it? "I'll take it," she told Marcus Hartwell, her voice steadier than she felt. "The windmill. I'll take the inheritance. Miss Reyes, I should advise. I know it's broken. I know about the taxes. I'll figure it out." She was lying. She had no idea how to figure it out. But something in Peter's letter had planted a seed, and Carmen had learned that sometimes you had to bet everything on impossible things because playing it safe meant dying slowly instead of all at once. 2 weeks later, they were on a plane to Amsterdam. Carmen had maxed out her last credit card for the tickets, called every client and employer to explain she needed 2 weeks off, and packed everything that mattered into 2 duffel bags because she wasn't sure they'd have an apartment to come back to. Marco pressed his face against the airplane window, watching clouds below like they were magical. He'd never been on a plane before. Neither had Carmen. They shared a packet of pretzels that cost $6 because Carmen hadn't known airport food would be so expensive, and tried not to think about the credit card debt growing with each passing hour. The Netherlands appeared through morning mist, all flat land and water, and orderly fields that looked nothing like the California neighborhoods Carmen had never left. A rental car that cost too much and drove on the wrong side of the road. A GPS that spoke Dutch and English in alternating commands that made Carmen's head spin. They drove for 2 hours through countryside that looked like paintings, past windmills that actually worked, their sails turning lazily in spring breeze. Marco counted them, delighted. 17 windmills. "Mama, are they all ours?" "Just one, baby. Just one." It appeared finally, standing alone, in a field gone wild with weeds. Peter's windmill was exactly as bad as the photographs had suggested. Worse, actually, because pictures couldn't capture the smell of rot or the way the entire structure leaned slightly, like an old man too tired to stand straight. The stone foundation rose 15 feet, massive blocks fitted together over a century ago. Above that, wooden walls weathered to grey, windows broken or missing entirely. The sails, once proud symbols of industry, hung at angles that defied physics and safety. One had broken completely, its shattered remains scattered across the overgrown yard. "It's broken," Marco said, his voice small with disappointment. "Yeah, baby. It really is." They got out of the car. The wind was stronger here, coming off the flat landscape with nothing to stop it. Carmen approached the door, which hung by one hinge, and pushed it open. Inside was worse. Decades of weather had destroyed most of the interior. The wooden floors were rotted through in places. The grinding mechanism that had once turned grain to flour was rusted solid. A skeleton of gears and shafts that looked like some industrial monster had died mid-motion. Bird nests filled every corner. Water damage stained everything. "Mama, I'm scared." Marco gripped her hand. "Me too, baby." But they'd come this far. Carmen found the stairs, testing each step before putting her weight on it. They climbed carefully to the second floor, then the third, each level more destroyed than the last. At the top, where the sails had once connected to the grinding mechanism, wind whistled through gaps in the walls. The view was beautiful, endless fields and distant towns, but the floor was so unstable Carmen was afraid to move. They climbed back down carefully. At the ground level, Carmen studied the massive stone foundation, running her hands over blocks that had stood for nearly 2 centuries. The foundation holds more than just stone. Where would someone hide something? The walls were solid. The stones fitted so tightly a knife blade couldn't slip between them. She walked the perimeter, Marco following, both of them looking for anything unusual. It was Marco who found it. "Mama, this rock is different." He was right. One stone, about 3 feet up, had different tooling marks. The edges were slightly more worn, as if it had been moved more than the others. Carmen pressed against it, pushed, pulled. Nothing happened. She found a loose board from the destroyed interior and used it as a lever, wedging it beside the stone. She pulled with all her strength, the board creaking, her muscles screaming. The stone shifted. She pulled harder. The stone moved again, just slightly. Marco helped, his small hands gripping the board. Together they leveraged it until the stone finally gave way, sliding out of its position with a grinding sound. Behind it was darkness. A space. Carmen's heart hammered as she pulled out her phone, turning on the flashlight. The opening was small, maybe 2 feet square, leading into a hollow in the foundation. The phone's light caught something metallic. Carmen reached in carefully, her mind screaming about spiders and rats and things that lived in dark spaces. Her fingers touched metal. She pulled out a box, tin or steel, about the size of a shoebox. It was locked. No, sealed, soldered shut, the edges crusted with age. "What is it?" Marco's voice was breathless. "I don't know, baby." There was more. Carmen reached back into the hollow, feeling around. Her hand touched paper. She pulled out a packet wrapped in oilcloth, remarkably well preserved. And behind that, more boxes. 4 of them, all sealed. They carried everything outside into the light. Carmen's hands trembled as she unwrapped the oilcloth. Inside were documents, old papers in plastic sleeves. The first page was a letter in Peter's handwriting, dated just 6 months before his death. "To my inheritor, if you found this, you are braver than I hoped and smarter than I feared. What you hold is my family's secret, kept for generations, hidden when hiding was survival. My grandfather, Johannes van der Berg, was a dealer in art and antiquities in Amsterdam before the war. When the Nazis came, when they began taking everything of value, he moved his most precious pieces here, to this windmill where his brother lived. The mill was just a mill then, important to no one, overlooked by soldiers, focused on cities and treasures they could see. After the war, much of what was hidden was returned to rightful owners, but some pieces had no owners left to return them to. Families destroyed, records burned, art and valuables that became, by terrible default, mine to keep or surrender. I kept them. Perhaps that was wrong. I told myself I was preserving them, protecting them, waiting for someone who might have a claim. But really, I was afraid. Afraid of questions I couldn't answer. Afraid of losing the only family history I had left. Inside these boxes are documents of provenance, carefully maintained, every piece traced, as carefully as I could manage. Some belonged to families who died in camps, some to collectors whose estates vanished. I leave it to you to decide what is right. But know this, the items themselves are valuable. More valuable than this windmill, this land, perhaps more valuable than anything you've known. Use them wisely. Use them well. Use them to build something better than the scared, lonely life I lived. Peter. Carmen's hands shook as she opened the first sealed box. Inside, wrapped in cloth and protective paper, was a small painting. She lifted it carefully, her breath catching. Even she could see it was old, important. A portrait of a young woman in 17th century dress, her eyes following Carmen with an intensity that made her skin prickle. There was a small card tucked beside it, typed on an ancient typewriter. Judith Leyster, portrait of a young woman, circa 1635. Provenance traced to the Goldstein family of Amsterdam. Last known location, taken during the liquidation of the Jewish quarter, 1942. Carmen's vision blurred. This was real. This was. She opened the second box with trembling hands. Inside were jewels, antique pieces, that caught the afternoon light and scattered it like stars. Necklaces, rings, brooches, each with its own documentation card. Dutch Golden Age. Inherited by the Hartog family. Confiscated 1943. The third box held more paintings, smaller pieces, each carefully preserved. The fourth contained documents, bonds, stock certificates from companies Carmen vaguely recognized. Some dated from the 1932, others more recent, as if Peter had been carefully managing investments for decades. Carmen spread everything on the overgrown grass. Documents, and art, and jewels, and papers that represented lives destroyed, history preserved. Marco watched with wide eyes, not understanding but sensing something important was happening. "Mama, are we rich now?" Carmen couldn't answer. She couldn't breathe. This was, she couldn't even guess. Hundreds of thousands, millions. The painting alone, if it was real, if it was authenticated. Her phone buzzed. A text from her landlord. "Last chance. Pay by Friday, or I'm filing eviction." Carmen laughed, a sound like breaking glass. 3 days ago, that message would have destroyed her. Now, sitting beside a broken windmill with art that had survived the Holocaust, text seemed absurd, meaningless. She called Marcus Hartwell immediately. "Miss Reyes, I hope you're not calling about those back taxes, because I'm afraid I found something in the windmill. I need you to contact whoever handles provenance research and Holocaust art claims. I need experts. Authentication. I need." She was babbling, words tumbling over each other. "Slow down. What did you find?" I think Peter hid artwork, valuables. From World War II, there's documentation, provenance records, letters. Marcus, I think this might be worth millions." The silence on the other end stretched so long Carmen thought the call had dropped. "Don't touch anything else," Marcus finally said, his casual tone completely gone. "Don't move it. Don't clean it. Don't let anyone see it. I'm calling the Dutch authorities and the claims conference. Stay there. Someone will come to you." Carmen ended the call and looked at Marco, at the boxes, at the broken windmill that had protected secrets for 8 decades. "What's going to happen, Mama?" "I don't know, baby." Carmen pulled him close, both of them sitting in the wild grass beside impossible treasures. "But I think, Uncle, Peter just gave us a miracle." The experts arrived within hours. First local police, to secure the site. Then representatives from the Dutch Ministry of Culture, their faces grave with the weight of history. A team from the Commission for Looted Art in Europe. Authentication specialists from Amsterdam's Rijksmuseum. By nightfall, Peter's windmill was surrounded by vehicles and people treating the space like a crime scene, which in some ways it was a crime of theft committed 80 years ago, evidence preserved by a man who'd lived alone with terrible knowledge. Carmen and Marco were moved to a hotel in the nearest town, a comfortable place that felt obscenely luxurious after their apartment back home. She sat on the bed while Marco slept, watching news reports that had somehow already caught wind of the story. Major discovery of looted Nazi art in rural Netherlands. Potential value in the tens of millions. Tens of millions. Carmen's mind couldn't process numbers that large. She thought about the $16,000 in back taxes that had seemed impossible, about the $950 rent she couldn't pay, about a life built on choosing between bad options and worse ones. Her phone rang. An unlisted number. "Miss Reyes, this is Dr. Helena van Straten from the Rijksmuseum. I've been examining the materials found in your great-uncle's windmill. We need to talk. Urgently. Tomorrow morning, I'm sending a car." The meeting took place in a conference room that looked like it belonged in a government building. All serious faces and manila folders containing facts too heavy for casual conversation. Dr. Van Straten was a woman in her 60s, with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen too much suffering in photographs and documents. "Miss Reyes, what your great-uncle preserved is," she paused, choosing words carefully. "Significant, doesn't begin to cover it. The Judith Leyster painting alone is a major discovery. It was listed in the Dutch Inventory of Cultural Losses from World War II. The Goldstein family who owned it died in Auschwitz. There are no living heirs." Carmen's throat tightened. "Then, who does it belong to? That's the complicated question." Dr. Van Straten pulled out documents. Under Dutch law and international conventions regarding Holocaust looted art, pieces without direct heirs typically go to restitution funds or museums. However, your great-uncle's documentation changes things. He didn't steal these items. He hid them, preserved them, maintained meticulous records, and he explicitly left them to you with instructions to handle them ethically. I don't want to keep something that was stolen from people who died. That's admirable. But understand, not all these items fall into that category. Dr. Van Straten spread papers across the table. Some pieces have been traced to families with living descendants. Those will be returned. But others, like the Leyster painting, have no one left. Under the law, they become assets of the estate. Your estate. Over the next 3 hours, Dr. Van Straten walked Carmen through each item. The painting, $4 million at auction, if returned to appropriate parties, possibly a finder's fee or acknowledgement. More likely, the ethical choice was returned to a museum with the Goldstein name honored. The jewelry, some pieces traced to families, others completely orphaned by genocide. Value impossible to estimate without full gemological analysis, but preliminary assessment suggested $12.15 million for the orphaned pieces. The paintings and drawings in the other boxes. A. Mix. 3 had living claimants who would be contacted. 4 were orphaned. Combined auction value, $35.40 million. Conservatively, the documents, bonds, and certificates. This was where things got interesting. Peter had apparently spent decades tracking down what happened to various Jewish-owned businesses whose assets had been seized. He'd somehow acquired stock certificates and bonds that, if legal ownership could be established, might be worth substantial sums. Some companies no longer existed, others had evolved, merged, become parts of modern corporations. Untangling it would take years. Estimated value: unknown, but potentially $20, $30 million. The total, Dr. Van Straten said carefully, assuming ethical returns are made to families with claims, assuming you donate certain pieces to appropriate institutions, assuming the documentation is verified and legal ownership established, you're looking at approximately $60, $5 million, in assets that would legitimately belong to you. Carmen stopped breathing. The number was impossible, meaningless, more money than existed in her real life. However, Dr. Van Straten continued, there's something else, something I believe Peter specifically intended for you. She pulled out a separate folder. We found a safe deposit box key in the hollow, along with documentation. The box is in Amsterdam, in a bank that's been holding it for 40 years. Your great-uncle paid the fees annually. We opened it this morning, with bank representatives present. Dr. Van Straten removed photographs. Inside was a single item, a necklace. The image showed a spectacular piece, diamonds and sapphires, in a design that was unmistakably antique and unmistakably valuable. This necklace has no Holocaust provenance. It was purchased by Johannes van der Berg in 1938, before the war, from an estate sale in Belgium. It has a completely clean chain of ownership, and according to a letter Peter left in the safe deposit box, he kept this separately, specifically, so that whoever inherited would have one piece that came with no ethical complications, something that was unquestionably, legally yours to do with as you wished. The necklace was appraised yesterday by Sotheby's. Dr. Van Straten met Carmen's eyes. Conservative auction estimate, $35 million. And quote. The room spun. Carmen gripped the table, trying to stay upright. $35 million for one necklace. That was legally, unquestionably, hers. He did this on purpose, she whispered. Peter. He wanted whoever inherited to have something without complications, without guilt. I believe so. Dr. Van Straten's expression softened. Your great-uncle was a careful man. Perhaps too careful, too afraid to do what was right while he was alive. But he made sure you would have the resources and the responsibility to finish what he couldn't. Over the next 6 weeks, Carmen's life became something from someone else's story. Teams of researchers verified provenances. Families with legitimate claims were contacted, and Carmen made sure every piece that could be returned to descendants was returned, regardless of the financial cost to her. The Leicester painting went to the Rijksmuseum with a permanent plaque honoring the Goldstein family and Peter van der Berg's preservation efforts. The orphan jewelry and art pieces went to auction, with much of the proceeds going to Holocaust education and restitution funds. What remained, still substantial, belonged to Carmen. The necklace sold at Sotheby's for $37.2 million, exceeding estimates. After taxes and fees, Carmen cleared $28 million from that alone. The remaining assets, including stock certificates that were validated, brought her total to just over $95 million. Carmen stood in Marcus Hartwell's office again, this time in a suit that actually fit. Marco, beside her, in clothes that didn't come from thrift stores, and signed papers that transferred funds, established trusts, created foundations. She paid off every debt she'd ever accumulated, paid back taxes on the Windmill, all $16,000, which now seemed like loose change, set up college funds for Marco, bought a house, Not a mansion, but a real home with a yard and room for Marco to play. But mostly, she created the Vanderburg Foundation for Cultural Preservation and Holocaust Education, endowed with $40 million, dedicated to finding and repatriating looted art and educating future generations about the cost of hatred. The windmill itself became a museum. Carmen paid for its complete restoration, bringing in master craftsmen to repair the sails, rebuild the interior, preserve the stone foundation that had protected secrets for 80 years. It opened to the public with exhibits telling Pieter's story, Johannes's story, the stories of families whose possessions had been stolen and sometimes, miraculously, returned. On opening day, Carmen stood with Marco in the restored space where grinding mechanisms had been replaced with display cases. Representatives from families who'd received returned property came to thank her. Holocaust survivors, now in their 90s, came to see proof that some things could be recovered, that some losses could be acknowledged if not repaired. Did Uncle Peter know? Marco asked, studying a photograph of the carte. Great-great-uncle he'd never met. Did he know we'd find it? I think he hoped, Carmen said, her voice thick with emotion. I think he spent his whole life hoping that someone would be brave enough to look and honest enough to do what was right once they found it. A woman approached, elderly, using a cane. Excuse me, are you Carmen Reyes? I am. My name is Sarah Goldstein Cohen. I'm the great-niece of the family who owned the Judith Leyster painting. I wanted to thank you for returning it to the museum with my family's name. You could have kept it, legally. Perhaps you could have. It wasn't mine to keep. No, but many people would have kept it anyway. Sarah's eyes were bright with tears. My great-grandparents died in Auschwitz. Their children, my grandmother's siblings, died in various camps. The Nazis took everything. Our home, our business, our art, our family. For decades, we had nothing left of them. No photographs, no belongings, no proof they existed, except names in memorial books. She pulled out a tissue, dabbing her eyes. Now, because of your great-uncle and because of you, there's a painting in the Rijksmuseum with their name on it. Forever. People will see it and know the Goldsteins existed, that they had good taste, that they mattered. You gave my family back their history. Carmen couldn't speak, could only hug this woman who carried grief from decades before her birth. That evening, she and Marco walked around the windmill's exterior as the sun set, painting the stone foundation in shades of gold. The sails turned slowly in the breeze, restored to function, grinding nothing but air now, a monument rather than a mill. Mama, what would have happened if we hadn't come? If we'd just stayed home? Carmen thought about the lawyer's office, about the choice she'd almost not made, about back taxes and eviction notices, and the weight of always choosing safety over possibility. We would have survived, she said finally. We always survived, but we wouldn't have lived. Not really. Not like this. Was Uncle Peter rich? No, baby. He was just careful. He protected things everyone else forgot about. Like us. When we didn't have money and nobody cared, Carmen knelt beside her son, this child who'd survived breakfasts of crackers and dinners of hope, who'd slept on buses between jobs and never complained. Yeah, baby, exactly like us. I'm glad we came here. I'm glad we looked in the walls. Me too. They sat together as darkness fell, and the windmill's lights came on, illuminating restored wood and ancient stone, secrets revealed and honors restored. Somewhere, Carmen thought, Peter Vanderburg was watching, satisfied that his lonely life had ended up mattering after all, that the windmill he'd refused to abandon had protected treasures that would outlive them all. That family, even family you'd never met, could reach across decades and deaths to give you one more chance. Inside the museum, visitors moved between exhibits, learning about art and theft and survival and return, learning that sometimes broken things held more value than anyone guessed, learning that hope, stubborn and persistent, could outlast hatred. That one person, choosing to look deeper, choosing to do what's right, even when it cost everything, could change how the world remembered the past. Carmen's phone buzzed. A message from the foundation's director. 3 more families had come forward with claims to other pieces. Documentation was being verified. More returns would be made. More histories restored. Good, Carmen murmured, looking up at the windmill that had changed everything. That's exactly right. Behind her, the restored sails turned in the gathering night, grinding nothing but catching wind, standing watch over secrets revealed and promises kept, over a foundation that had held more than just stone, over an inheritance that had saved 2 lives and honored thousands more. And in the darkness, if you listened carefully, you could almost hear the voice of a lonely old man who'd lived surrounded by treasures he couldn't enjoy, finally at peace because someone had been brave enough to look deeper and honest enough to do what he'd been too afraid to do himself. The windmill stood, restored and purposeful, proof that broken things could be made whole again, that secrets kept for the right reasons could become miracles, and that sometimes, just sometimes, inheritance meant more than property or money. It meant responsibility, redemption, and the chance to make things right at last. 6 months after the Windmill Museum opened, Carmen stood in her new office overlooking San Francisco Bay, a space she'd never imagined having. The Van der Berg Foundation occupied an entire floor of a restored warehouse, with views of the water and enough room for the growing team of researchers, archivists, and restitution specialists she'd hired. Her phone buzzed with a call from Dr. Van Straten. "Carmen, we have a situation. A good one, I think, but complicated. Tell me." "We've been contacted by a family in Poland. The Kowalski family. They believe one of the paintings from your great-uncle's collection belonged to their grandmother, but the documentation was destroyed during the Warsaw Uprising. They have photographs, family letters, but nothing that would hold up legally." Carmen's stomach tightened. This was the nightmare scenario, legitimate claims without legitimate proof. "What do you think?" "Honestly, I believe them. The painting style matches what we know of their grandmother's taste. The time frame works. But legally, you're under no obligation. The painting is yours." "Which painting?" "The small Vermeer sketch. Worth approximately $8 million. Carmen closed her eyes, thinking about Sarah Goldstein Cohen's tears, about families who had lost everything. "Send me everything you have. If they're telling the truth, they deserve it back." "Carmen, you could lose $8 million on a hunch. Or I could return something irreplaceable to people who've waited 80 years for justice. Send me the files." She hung up and stared out at the water, thinking about choices and consequences. Marco was in his new school now, thriving in ways that made Carmen's heart ache. They had a house with a yard and neighbors who didn't know or care about their past. She'd hired a tutor to help Marco catch up on the education he'd missed during their hardest years. She'd started therapy to process everything: the poverty, the fear, the poverty, sudden wealth, the weight of responsibility. The money had changed everything and nothing. She still woke at 4 a.m. sometimes, panic rising in her chest about rent she didn't owe anymore, bills she'd already paid. She still checked prices at grocery stores, still bought store brands, still felt guilty spending money on anything that wasn't necessary. The poverty mindset didn't vanish just because the bank account had more zeros. But she was learning that she deserved comfort. learning that Marco deserved experiences, not just survival, learning that wealth was a tool, not a trap. Her assistant knocked on the door. "Carmen, you have visitors. They don't have an appointment, but they said it's urgent. A Mr. and Mrs. van der Berg, from Rotterdam." Carmen's pulse quickened. Van der Berg. More family she'd never known existed? The couple who entered were in their 70s, well-dressed, carrying themselves with the careful dignity of people who'd learned to navigate difficult conversations. The woman spoke first, her English accented but clear. "Miss Reyes, I am Margot van der Berg, and this is my husband, Klaus. We are Pieter's cousins. We came to apologize." "Apologize? For what?" Margot's eyes filled with tears. "For abandoning him, for letting him live alone all those years, for believing the family stories that he was strange, difficult, not worth knowing." Klaus took his wife's hand. "When Willem left for America in 1952, there was a falling out. Something about the family business, about choices made during the war. Pieter took Willem's side, which made him unpopular with the rest of the family. Over the years, we just stopped trying. We assumed he was fine alone in that windmill. We didn't know about the art, the hiding, the weight he carried. We read about the museum," Margot continued, "about what you did, returning pieces to families, honoring the dead, about how Pieter preserved everything so carefully. And we realized we failed him. We let him carry that burden alone." Carmen gestured for them to sit. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you need to know," Klaus said. "When you make decisions about the remaining pieces, about the foundation's work, you should know that Pieter didn't choose isolation. It was forced on him by a family too proud to forgive, too stubborn to reach out. Don't make our mistakes. Don't let righteousness become cruelty." They talked for 2 hours. Margot and Klaus told stories about Pieter as a young man, brilliant, with numbers, passionate about history, deeply lonely even then. They explained the family dynamics, the old grudges that had calcified into permanent estrangement. They wept for opportunities lost, for a cousin who died alone when he should have been surrounded by family. "We're not here for money," Margot said, as they prepared to leave. "We just wanted you to know that Pieter wasn't strange or difficult. He was hurt, and he chose to transform that hurt into protection, into preservation. That took courage we didn't have." After they left, Carmen sat in her office, watching the sun set over the bay. She thought about Pieter in that windmill, maintaining meticulous records, protecting treasures no one knew existed, living alone with the weight of history and family rejection. She thought about how easily she could have become like him, bitter, isolated, defined by betrayal and loss. But she'd chosen differently. Or maybe the choice had been made for her by a dead man's faith that someone would be brave enough to look deeper. Her phone rang. Marcus Hartwell. "Carmen, we have a problem. Victor Blackwell's family is contesting the inheritance." Her stomach dropped. "Who's Victor Blackwell?" "Pieter's other cousin. He's claiming that Pieter wasn't of sound mind when he wrote the will, that the property and its contents should be distributed among all living van der Berg relatives, not given to some distant American relative no one knew existed. Can he do that?" "He can try. He's filed suit in Dutch court. The hearing is in 3 weeks." Carmen wanted to scream. Of course, someone would try to take this away. What do we need to do? Prove that Pieter knew exactly what he was doing, that he had good reason to bypass his Dutch relatives and leave everything to you. Can you come back to the Netherlands? 3 weeks later, Carmen stood in a Dutch courtroom that looked like it had survived centuries of disputes and betrayals. Victor Blackwell sat across the aisle, a man in his 60s with Willem's eyes and none of his warmth. His lawyer was expensive, aggressive, armed with arguments that painted Peter as mentally unstable, Carmen as an opportunist who'd manipulated a vulnerable old man. Mr. Vanderberg lived alone for 40 years, the lawyer argued. He had no contact with his American relatives, yet suddenly, in his final months, he decides to leave everything to a great niece he'd never met. This reeks of undue influence. There was no undue influence, Marcus countered. Miss Reyes didn't even know Peter existed until after his death. The will was executed months before she was contacted. Then why her? Why bypass his Dutch family entirely? That's when Dr. Van Straten was called to testify. She'd flown in from Amsterdam, bringing documents Carmen hadn't known existed. I met with Mr. Vanderberg 3 times in the year before his death, Dr. Van Straten explained. He contacted the museum about the hidden collection, seeking advice on what to do with it. He showed me his documentation, his decades of research, and he showed me something else. She pulled out a folder. Mr. Vanderberg had been tracking his American family for years. Newspaper clippings, social media posts, public records. He knew about Carmen Reyes, knew she was working multiple jobs to support her son, knew she was struggling. And he told me, explicitly, that he wanted to leave his estate to someone who would understand what it meant to protect valuable things everyone else overlooked. She read from her notes. My Dutch family has money and comfort. They don't need what I can give. But this woman, Carmen, she's fighting every day just to survive. She'll understand that sometimes valuable things look worthless to those who don't know how to see. She'll look deeper, and if she doesn't, if she just sells everything, at least she'll have resources to build a better life. Either way, I'd rather help her than relatives who couldn't be bothered to visit me in 40 years. The courtroom went silent. Victor's face flushed red. His lawyer shuffled papers, suddenly uncertain. Mr. Vanderberg was of sound mind. Dr. Van Straten continued. He was intentional, thoughtful, and specific about his wishes. He chose Carmen Reyes, not despite being a stranger, but because she was someone who needed what he could give and might have the courage to do what he couldn't. The judge asked Victor's lawyer if he had further arguments. The lawyer requested a recess. During the break, Marcus pulled Carmen aside. They're going to offer a settlement, split the remaining assets, drop the case. Everyone walks away. What do you think? I think we'd win if we fight. But fighting costs time and money, and it would drag Peter's name through more mud. Carmen thought about Margot and Klaus's apology, about Victor's face when Dr. Van Straten read Peter's words, about families torn apart by pride and healed by honesty. I'll make him an offer, she said. He drops the case entirely. In exchange, I'll establish a Vanderberg family foundation here in the Netherlands. 1 million euros. Klaus and Margot can help run it, channeling funds to Dutch cultural preservation. Victor can be involved, if he wants, or not. His choice. That's generous considering he's trying to steal from you. Peter spent his whole life isolated from family. I won't continue that legacy. This ends here. Victor accepted the offer. The case was dismissed. A month later, Carmen stood with Klaus, Margot, and even Victor at the signing ceremony for the Vanderberg Family Foundation. Victor's apology was stiff, awkward, but genuine. I was wrong, he admitted. About Peter, about you, about everything. I let old grudges make me cruel. Then don't let them anymore, Carmen said simply. Choose differently going forward. Back in San Francisco, life found a new rhythm. Marco thrived, making friends, joining soccer, talking about becoming an archaeologist, or maybe a lawyer, or possibly a teacher. Carmen learned to sleep past 4 a.m., to buy clothes that fit, to say yes to experiences without calculating the cost. She dated briefly, awkwardly, unsure how to explain her life to normal people with normal histories. The Foundation's work expanded. They'd facilitated the return of 47 pieces of looted art to families or appropriate institutions. They'd funded Holocaust education programs in 12 countries. They'd established scholarships for students studying art history and cultural preservation. The work mattered in ways money alone never could. But the Kowalski case haunted her. The Polish family, with the Vermeer sketch, with their photographs and letters but no legal proof. Carmen had sent researchers to Warsaw, to London, to anywhere that might hold records. They found corroboration letters mentioning a small but exquisite painting that matched the sketch's description. Gallery receipts from the 1,930 seconds. Testimony from neighbors who remembered the grandmother's collection. It wasn't proof. Not legally. But it was true. Carmen felt it in her bones. She called Dr. Van Straten. The Vermeer sketch. I want to return it to the Kowalski family. Carmen, you could lose 8 million. I know. Return it anyway. The money isn't mine. It was stolen from people who died. If there's even a chance the Kowalskis are telling the truth, they deserve to have their grandmother's painting back. You're sure? I'm sure. The presentation ceremony took place in Warsaw, at the royal castle that had been destroyed during the war, and painstakingly rebuilt. The Kowalski family, 3 generations of descendants, stood together as Carmen handed over the sketch their grandmother had been forced to abandon. This is yours, Carmen said simply. It's always been yours. I'm sorry it took so long to come home. The eldest, Kowalski, a woman in her 90s, touched the frame with trembling fingers. My mother spoke of this painting until the day she died, said it was the only beautiful thing in their apartment, the one piece of art they owned. When the Nazis came, she had to leave it behind. She never forgave herself. She 20 didn't have a choice. No. But now, because of you, because of your great uncle, it's home. My grandchildren will see what my grandmother loved. They'll know her taste, her heart, her loss, and her survival. You gave us back our history. The Polish press covered the story extensively. It caught international attention. Major news networks featured segments on the American woman giving away millions to right historical wrongs. The publicity brought more families forward with potential claims, more research, more complicated decisions about what was right versus what was legal. Some pieces went to museums. Some returned to families. Some Carmen kept, displaying them in the Foundation's offices with full provenance information, available for scholars and descendants to study. Each decision was agonizing, weighing ethics against law, restitution against preservation. On Marco's 8th birthday, Carmen took him back to the Netherlands, to the restored windmill that had changed everything. They walked through the museum together, Marco reading plaques and asking questions that grew more sophisticated each year. Mama, if Uncle Pieter had just sold everything, he would have been rich. Why did he hide it instead? Because he was afraid. Afraid of asking questions he didn't know how to answer. Afraid of doing the wrong thing. So he did nothing. Is that why he gave it to you? So you'd be brave enough? Carmen knelt beside her son. This boy, who'd grown up eating crackers for breakfast, and now asked questions about ethics and restitution. I think he gave it to me because he knew I'd been broken too, that I'd understand what it means to protect valuable things everyone else overlooks, including myself. They climbed to the top of the restored windmill, standing where the grinding mechanism had once turned grain to flour. The Dutch countryside spread out below, endless flat fields and distant towns. Do you miss our old apartment? Marco asked suddenly. No. Do you? Sometimes. It was small, but we were together. We're still together, baby. We'll always be together. But now we're together with money. That's better, right? Carmen thought about the question, about nights on buses and break-room couches, about choosing between electricity and food, about the weight of constant fear. The money made things easier. But we were always valuable, Marco. Even when we had nothing, Uncle Peter knew that. That's why he chose us. That evening, they had dinner with Klaus and Margot at a restaurant near the Windmill. The elderly couple had become surrogate grandparents to Marco, filling gaps Carmen's own family couldn't. They told stories about the Van der Berg family history, about generations of millers and merchants and survivors. Peter would be proud, Klaus said, watching Carmen with Marco. You didn't just accept his gift. You transformed it, made it mean something. I'm just trying to do what's right. That's exactly what makes him proud. A year later, the foundation received a letter that changed everything again. It came from a researcher in Berlin who'd been investigating Nazi-era art seizures. Dear Miss Reyes, my name is Dr. Hans Müller. I specialize in tracking financial assets seized during the Holocaust. I've been researching the Van der Berg family history and discovered something extraordinary. In 1941, Johannes van der Berg's art business was liquidated by the Nazis. The official records claim he was paid fair value for his inventory, approximately 100,000 Reichsmarks. In reality, this was theft. The business was worth millions. I've found documentation that Johannes filed claims after the war, seeking restitution. He was denied repeatedly, dismissed, told there was insufficient proof. He died in 1967, still fighting. But I've found something. The German government maintained detailed records of seizures, storing them in archives that only recently became accessible. I have proof of Johannes's claims, proof that he was owed restitution that was never paid. Under current German law regarding Holocaust claims, this debt remains enforceable. With interest over 80 years, the settlement would be approximately €47 million. As Johannes's heir through Peter, you would be the legal claimant. Carmen stared at the letter, her hands shaking. €47 million. More than she'd already received, more than she needed, more than made sense. She called an emergency meeting with her legal team, with Dr. Van Straten, with advisors who'd helped navigate the complicated landscape of Holocaust restitution. This is legitimate, Marcus confirmed after reviewing Dr. Müller's documentation. The claim is valid. You could file and almost certainly win. Should I? The question hung in the air. Dr. Van Straten spoke carefully. That depends on what you want this to mean. You could take the money. You've earned it through the work you've done. Or you could establish it as a dedicated fund. Not for yourself, but for other families, still fighting for restitution. Families who don't have resources for lawyers, for researchers, for the long battles against bureaucracies. Carmen thought about Johannes, fighting for decades for justice that never came. About Peter, living alone with the weight of unpaid debts. About families, still waiting, still hoping, still searching for acknowledgement that theft had occurred. The Van der Berg Justice Fund, she said quietly, dedicated to helping families pursue legitimate Holocaust restitution claims. We fight for them. We fund their cases. We don't stop until everyone who deserves justice has at least a chance at it. Marcus smiled. Peter would love that. The claim against the German government succeeded. The €47 million settlement came through after a year of negotiations. True to her word, Carmen established the Justice Fund, hiring a team of lawyers researchers dedicated to helping families navigate restitution claims. In the first year, they helped 23 families recover assets worth over €100 million combined. On the 5th anniversary of the Windmill Museum's opening, Carmen stood before a crowd of hundreds descendants of families who'd received returned art, Holocaust survivors and their children, researchers and museum curators, Klaus and Margot, and even Victor van der Berg, united now in purpose, if not always in agreement. 5 years ago, Carmen began, her voice steady despite emotion threatening to crack it. I was a single mother working 4 jobs, facing eviction, choosing between electricity and food. I received a letter about an inheritance from a great-uncle I'd never met. A broken windmill, a burden disguised as a gift. She looked at Marco, 11 now and sitting in the front row with the confidence of a child, who'd never doubted his worth. But Pieter van der Berg wasn't giving me a windmill. He was giving me a choice. The choice to see deeper, to look past what appeared worthless, and find what mattered. To understand that the most valuable things are often the ones everyone else overlooks. Her voice grew stronger. In 5 years, we've returned 127 pieces of stolen art to families or institutions. We've helped 94 families pursue and win restitution claims. We've established education programs reaching 200,000 students. We've invested $85 million in cultural preservation and Holocaust remembrance. She paused, looking at the museum behind her, the restored windmill standing proud against the Dutch sky. But numbers don't capture what this really means. Every returned painting is a grandmother remembered. Every piece of jewelry is a love story that survived hatred. Every successful claim is proof that justice, even delayed, still matters. This work, this inheritance, isn't about money. It's about choosing to see people everyone else stopped looking for, to value lives everyone else forgot, to insist that memory and dignity matter more than convenience or profit. The crowd erupted in applause. Carmen stepped down from the podium, and Marco met her with a hug that felt like absolution. That night, alone in the Windmill's foundation where everything had started, Carmen placed her hand on the stone where Pieter had hidden his secrets. She thought about the woman she'd been terrified, exhausted, invisible to a world that only saw labor, never humanity. She thought about the choices that had brought her here, to this moment, to this life she'd never imagined possible. Thank you, Uncle Pieter, she whispered to the stone, to history, to the ghost of a lonely man who'd given a stranger permission to hope. Thank you for seeing me when no one else did. Thank you for trusting me with something bigger than survival. Thank you for teaching me that broken things can hold more value than anyone imagines. The windmill stood silent around her, its secrets revealed, its purpose fulfilled. Outside, the Dutch countryside stretched into darkness. But inside, in this foundation that had protected treasures through decades of darkness, light had finally, permanently, taken hold. Carmen walked out into the night air, breathing in possibility and peace. Somewhere, she knew, other families were still searching. Other treasures remained hidden. Other histories waited to be acknowledged. The work would never be finished. But that was okay. That was more than okay. Because she'd learned what Pieter had tried to teach her. That inheritance wasn't about what you received. It was about what you chose to do with it. How you transformed burden into blessing. How you turned survival into purpose. How you insisted, against all odds and obstacles, that people mattered, that history mattered, that dignity and justice and remembrance mattered, more than comfort or convenience. She'd chosen to look deeper when everyone said to walk away, chosen to give away millions when she could have kept them, chosen to fight for strangers when fighting for herself had almost broken her. And in those choices, she'd found something more valuable than any treasure hidden in stone foundations. She'd found meaning, purpose, proof that one person, choosing courage over fear, could change how the world remembered its past and built its future. That broken windmills could become monuments, that poverty could transform into philanthropy, that a single mother with nothing could become a woman who gave everything, because giving was the inheritance that mattered most. The windmill's lights illuminated the restored sails, turning slowly in the night breeze. Above, stars emerged, the same stars that had watched over Pieter's lonely years, over Johannes's hiding of treasures, over decades of secrets kept for all the right reasons and all the complicated ones. The same stars that watched now as Carmen Reyes, inheritor of windmills and wealth and responsibility, walked toward her future with her head high and her heart full, carrying forward a legacy of seeing the valuable in the overlooked, the precious in the abandoned, the possibility in the broken, and knowing, with bone-deep certainty, that she had honored Pieter's faith in her, that she had taken his gift and transformed it into something he'd never dared imagine but always hoped might be possible: redemption, restoration, and the stubborn, persistent triumph of choosing to do what's right, even when everything history, fear, poverty, pain told you to stop looking and walk away. She hadn't walked away. She'd looked deeper, and in looking, she'd found not just treasure, but truth, that the real inheritance was never in the gold. It was in having the courage to see, to care, and to insist that even after 80 years, justice still mattered, memory still mattered, people still mattered. The windmill stood behind her, a monument to all of that, to broken things made whole, to secrets revealed and honors restored, to one man's lonely faith that someone, someday, would be brave enough to look where everyone else had stopped searching, and to one woman's choice to prove him right. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.